The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love. Just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy might be complete. This is my commandment: love one another as I love you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer call you slaves, because a slave does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends, because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you and appointed you to bear fruit that will remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. This I command you: love one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
I'd like to tell you a great story about St. John the Evangelist, from whom our gospel comes today. I've been told it comes from Eusebius, the great historian of the 3rd century. You may know that John lived a lot longer than most of the other contemporaries of Jesus. And in the earliest days of the Christian church, as the people gathered for their weekly Eucharist, well, they always saw to it that John was there, no matter where they went. And they would ask him to preach. And invariably, he would say, "Little children, love one another." Essentially what he says in the gospel today. In fact, every time they came together, he would say the same thing: "Little children, come and love one another." And that was very much edifying for the people for a while. You see, after a time, they got sort of frustrated with this never-changing message. It seemed rather unimaginative to them, I suppose. And finally, they complained to the priests and said, "Hey, this is John. This is the only one among us who actually walked with and knew Jesus. Couldn't you please talk to him? Couldn't you get him to preach something new, something else?" So the priest sort of sheepishly went to John and told him what the people had said. And so the next time he came before the community, he got up and he said, "I am really sorry if I have offended any of you. It was never my intention. But there are 2 reasons why my message has never varied. First of all, love one another. It's really all that matters. It's the most important thing. And secondly, well, you're not doing it. And when I see you doing it, maybe I'll have something new to preach." Friends, what is said to have been spoken to the early Christians 2,000 years ago, sadly, could just as easily be spoken to us today. And perhaps for more than any other reason, we come here this morning to consider John's words and to learn some more about how to love. Today, Jesus says in the gospel, "If you love me, you will follow my commandments." It's part of his farewell discourse, a sort of long goodbye to his disciples. It is right here where he says that we must love one another, that our love must reflect his love for the Father and the Father's love for him, and that if it did, our joy would be complete. He didn't take this lightly, though. He knew it wouldn't be easy. And so Jesus promises to send an advocate. He promises us the Holy Spirit. So it is that the same Spirit in on the creation of the world, the same Spirit that brought through Mary the incarnation of God, would soon come to the disciples, indeed come to us all. This coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, which we will celebrate soon, brought us together as a church, as one community of disciples through the ages. Recall that moment when the Spirit hovers over the disciples like a wind. Then suddenly fire descends upon them, and this group of frightened followers is transformed into a group of fearless witnesses to Jesus. All of the readings are a call to fashion our lives into lives of love and service. We are challenged to look for ways to love, to be for one another, to be for those who are most vulnerable and without a voice, for the unborn and the poor, the immigrant and the refugee, for those who are sick or forgotten or in prison or dying, for those who might just be struggling to hold on. Our love must look like the love Jesus showed. We ought to live Jesus' commandment of love so well that people will look at us sort of odd. People ought to wonder why we love the way we do. And not just each other, but everyone, even the ones who aren't so easy to love. People ought to wonder about our joy, too, as today's letter says. They ought to wonder about the hope we have. Friends, in a bit over a week, our senior class will make their final visit to the grotto, the soul of this place. Not 20 steps away from there, there's a statue of an earlier graduate, Dr. Tom Dooley. He went out from this place, as they will, strengthened by his experience here and emboldened by the gospel. He was an amazing man who reached out to the poorest of refugees in Vietnam and throughout Southeast Asia. And Tom Dooley loved Notre Dame, and especially the grotto. And in front of his statue there is a letter that he wrote to Father Ted Hesburgh from a hospital bed in Hong Kong in the month before he died of cancer. He was only 34. If you haven't had a chance to read that letter, please do. It's worthy of your time. Let me share just a little part of it with you. You see, Dooley was lying in his hospital bed describing what was happening to him. And he tells Father Ted of his illness and his hope. And in the midst of it, even as he speaks of the calm of his heart and the depth of his prayer, he says in this February letter, and I quote him, "But just now, and so many times, how I long for the grotto. Away from the grotto, Dooley just prays. But at the grotto, especially now when there must be snow everywhere and the lake is ice glass, and that triangular fountain on the left is frozen solid, and all the priests are bundled in their too large, too long old black coats, and the students wear snow boots. If I could go to the grotto now, then I think I could sing inside. I could be full of faith and poetry and loveliness, and know more beauty, tenderness, and compassion. This is soggy sentimentalism, I know, but cold prayers from a hospital bed are just as pleasing to God as more youthful prayers from a grotto on the lid of night." End of quote. Friends, with the school year's end upon us, this is one of the last times this community will be able to unite here on a Sunday to worship together. Especially for our seniors, this is one of those last times, as it is for us all, really, because this whole community will be the less for the departure of all who are moving on from here. And before you seniors and others who are departing take your leave, before time gets away from us, I want to say something to you, but it's really something for us all. I want to invite you all to think about where you are, what you've learned, and about how you will love as you go out from here, from this basilica, from this university. I promise you, too, that I will pray for you. I will pray that the Holy Spirit, the advocate, will guide your steps and bless your way. I pray that all of us, like the disciples, will be continually transformed from frightened followers to fearless witnesses of Christ. And I pray that each and all of us will find ways to love so well that people will look at us sort of odd and wonder about the reason for our hope. And of course, we know that there will be days ahead for our seniors and for us all when you will long for the grotto as Dooley does, days when the burdens of life weigh too heavy or to love seems too hard. In those moments, pray for the Spirit that we are promised this day. And never forget the joy that God's love can bring. The Spirit will come just as surely as it did to the first disciples, just as surely as it is here right now. Be bold, each of you and all. Struggle to love as Christ loves. It truly is, as John is said to have said, all that matters. It's the only important thing.